Hey, good morning, and welcome back to Answers on Eschatology, guys. My name is Dan Derry, and I'm the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. Today, we want to look at Matthew chapter 4 and begin to lay some groundwork and some context into the beginning verses of the chapter. So, if you recall last video, I posed the question, why would Jesus' disciples point out the buildings of the temple to him? As they came out of the temple area, they said, look at all these buildings. Look at the temple. Look at the stones. Why would they do this? What was their point? Jesus had seen these things. He knew what they looked like. He knew the history. Why would they point out the temple and the buildings following Jesus' pronouncement of judgment for shedding innocent blood? That's the point. And I want to show you guys that based on Jesus' judgment in Matthew 23, the prophetic, his prophecy of judgment upon Jerusalem in his generation for shedding innocent blood prompted the disciples to ask or to point out the buildings. And I will demonstrate why as we go along. Let's look in Matthew chapter 23 and just see the context of the Olivet Discourse and why Jesus said what he said. So look at this, Matthew chapter 23 and let's look at verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence. So listen to this. He said, in them, they are the dish. They're full of robbery and self-indulgence. Robbery, remember this. And he says, look at this in verse 31. So you testify against yourselves that you are the sons who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how will you escape this sentence of hell? Therefore I'm sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that upon you may fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. And in verse 38, Jesus says, behold, your house is left to you desolate. Now please catch what just happened. Jesus pronounced judgment upon that first century Old Covenant Israel, the nation of Israel, for shedding the blood of the prophets and the blood of his prophets, which he would send to them, and for the plunder of the people. Okay? The Pharisees were hypocrites. They were plunderers, they were murderers, and they were robbers. And because of that, because of the plunder of the innocent and the shedding of the blood of the righteous, he prophesied judgment to come upon them and their house in their generation. Now watch this. Jesus is only doing what the Old Testament prophets had already said to the nation of Israel, and Jesus is repeating history. Okay, go with me to 2 Kings chapter 9. Watch this. 2 Kings 9, let's begin in verse 1. Now Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, gird up your loins and take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you arrive there, search out Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, and go in and bid him arise from among his brethren and bring him to an inner room. Then take the flask of oil and pour it on his head and say, thus saith the Lord, I have anointed you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee and not wait. So the young man, the servant of the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. When he came, behold, the captains of the army were sitting, and he said, I have a word for you, O captain. And Jehu said, for which one of us? He said, for you, O captain. He arose and went into the house and poured the oil on his head and said to him, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I've anointed you king over the people of the Lord, even over Israel. Now listen to this. You shall strike the house of Ahab your master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and all the blood of the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male person, both bond and free in Israel. Now watch this. Historically, what did Jezebel do? Jezebel murdered the prophets. And what did Ahab do? Ahab's great sin was he stole, he plundered the vineyard of Naboth, right? Of the peasant. He might not have been a peasant, but he was a commoner. He was the people. So Ahab was a plunderer, and Jezebel was a murderer of the righteous prophets. And Jehu was sent to avenge the blood of the prophets. And notice what the result was. For the blood of the prophets and for the plunder of the people, Ahab's house would be cut off. In other words, his house would be made desolate. Do you think the disciples remember this story when Jesus accused the Pharisees in his generation of murder of the righteous prophets and plundering of the people, and he pronounced, your house will be made to you desolate? I think so. Go with me to Lamentations chapter 4. Let's look at this again. Lamentations 4 and verse 11. The Lord has now, the context of Lamentations is obviously right after the Babylonian captivity and destruction of Jerusalem. And Jeremiah writes his lament for Jerusalem. Now watch this. The Lord has accomplished his wrath. He has poured out his fierce anger. He has kindled a fire in Zion, which has consumed its foundations. The kings of the earth did not believe, nor did any of the inhabitants of the world, that the adversary and the enemy could enter the gates of Jerusalem, because of the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests, who have shed in her midst the blood of the righteous. Listen, the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC at the hands of the Babylonians was the result of their shedding the blood of the righteous, the blood of the prophets. And catch this, guys. In verse 12, it says, the kings of the earth did not believe, nor did any of the inhabitants of the world, this is talking about Jerusalem, that the adversary and the enemy could enter the gates of Jerusalem. See, they were deceived. They thought, we're God's people. There's no way this Babylonian pagan army is coming in and taking our city and punishing us. But they did. Why? For shedding the blood of the righteous prophets and for their sins against Yahweh. Okay? And the same thing happened upon the house of Ahab. He and his wife, they had plundered the people, they had murdered the prophets, and that house would be made desolate. And in Lamentations, the house was made desolate. The temple was completely destroyed, and Judaism, for a time, was wiped out. Go with me back to Matthew chapter 23. Jesus prophesies in his generation that for the plundering of the people and for the murder of all the blood of the righteous, yea, even his prophets who he would send, that their house would be made desolate in their generation. And listen, just like the kings of the earth and the rulers of the people didn't believe that the enemy could enter the gates of Jerusalem, neither did Jesus' disciples. This is why when they walk out of the temple after Jesus has just said, your house is left to you desolate because you murdered the prophets, because it's vengeance for shedding innocent blood, his disciples come and say, Jesus, look at these temples. The enemy can't enter these gates. Look at these stones. Look at everything. Judgment's not coming upon us, because they understood Jesus' message. Just as judgment had come upon the house of Ahab and Jerusalem at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar for shedding the blood of the prophets, he was pronouncing judgment upon his generation for shedding the blood of his prophets and the prophets of old in his generation. And the disciples, they denied it. They, like their fathers of old, said, the enemy can't enter these gates. Look at these stones. And Jesus responded. And this sets the context, guys, for Matthew 24. Jesus responded, verily I say to you, do you see not all these things? Not one stone will be left upon another. Every one will be thrown down. He reiterates what he had just said. And Matthew 24, guys, is in that context. Matthew 24 is Jesus' prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 74. And as a result of the religious leaders of the day plundering the people and murdering the righteous. And the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 was the vindication of the blood of the righteous. It was God's vengeance. As Luke 21:20 and 20 to 23 says, those were the days of vengeance when all things written would be fulfilled. So guys, I hope this lays a foundation for Matthew 24 and sets the context. It is solely and completely about the destruction of Old Covenant Jerusalem in AD 70 for shedding the blood of the righteous. Thanks, guys. Let's pick this up next video. It's going to be a good study. I'm looking forward to it. We'll see you next time on Answers on Eschatology.